Oh no, I'm underwater.
Yeah, I can see. We get the top of Russell's head today. That's all.
I gotta swim out. There we go.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, Christian.
My daughter found the Iceberg Summit penguin hat again last night, so I had to wear it again. So Iceberg Summit still living in this house.
Let's just wait a couple of minutes for people to join. Okay, it's already now 5, and I think we have many people are joining here. So it seems today we have lots of topics to discuss. But I just want to take 2 minutes to quickly mention some highlights that happens to our REST catalog spec in the past few weeks. So first, thanks all for merging up here that clarifying that the 401 authorized response should be preferred over the 419 on token expiry. And I think this is a good start point that can be a first step that finally leads us to the discussion about deprecating the 419 response code. The discussion thread has also been opened in the dev main list. Please feel free to check that. And the second highlight is that we removed updates remove the row lineage table update in the REST spec is because the row lineage will be default to true in v3. So thanks, Ryan, for removing that, and thanks everyone for reviewing the PR. These are the two highlights, and let's move directly to the topics. The first topic is about enforcing unique table locations in the catalog. And I will, I don't know who put it there, but if you could provide like more information, please feel free to take it over.
It seems like we don't have the person here.
Yeah.
So I guess there were a couple of interesting comments, I think, on the pull request. Russell commented about, the location decision. Is that really something that a client should be doing? Because a lot of these catalog implementations are really somewhat client driven, unlike the REST catalog implementation. So if we take Glue as an example, the client is really, defining how it's going to talk to Glue. And as opposed to Glue defining the actual table name or location, we're just telling the client, hey, rather than putting in a character-based name, like put in a UID or something like that. Is that, Russell, did you have more to expand upon that comment?
Yeah, sorry, I should have been paying more attention. That is what I wrote and what I was thinking. Basically, and maybe I'm coming from this from too much of a biased perspective from how Polaris is being built, but like for catalogs vending credentials, really the one who should decide what the unique location is the catalog itself and not the client. I also worry about clients having this responsibility or even this implied responsibility, because you can have clients with bugs or clients with different versions, and then all of those violate the constraints that you're hoping to do it. Now, like if we wanted to have this be a signal that you would send to a catalog, like I want you to be responsible for managing location or assign a location for me, I think that maybe makes sense. I don't feel comfortable though with making this seem like it's a definite capability that the client can have.
Well, so the interesting thing is, with the exception of the REST catalog, all of the catalog implementations, it's really the client defining where it places a table path anyway. Like,
yeah.
I think the only one that doesn't work here is probably our infamous Hadoop catalog, because if you put the directory name as some random UID, that is now your table name, because that's how discovery happens. But for all the other clients, it's really, hey, what location path am I placing in the Glue config or the Hive location, versus what the REST catalog is doing, which is you are talking to the REST catalog and it ultimately owns the locations.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And that's why I don't have a strong aversion to having this be like a capability for those older clients, but I do think we should wrap this into like our discussion of what do owned locations actually look like in an Iceberg table context. Again, especially because, so we talked about this a lot when I was at Apple as well, about like what we could do to, in this situation where the client controls the directories being made, protect unique directories. And the problem is with a system like this, you still can't, because people can always put tables and subdirectories under your table, and then subdirectories under that, and we almost always had that happen, and it would always lead to like terrible things. So even if we put the constraints on them, even if we had them like check at the moment that you created tables that no other tables exist, like there's a lot of limitations. So could we add it as like a feature, like we will do a best effort to do this? I think that's okay thing to add. I worry more about saying like this is a guarantee that you will get a unique property.
I think it's very hard to make any guarantee from the client side. It's even for non-REST catalog, the catalog still have to make the decision and emit the unique path to the client side to guarantee that this is still puts the responsibility into the catalog side. I think this PI is mainly say, okay, I need a location. Can catalog give me a unique location, right? I need to detail look at detail of this PI, but I believe this is what it does. But still, in case of any catalog size implementation, like catalog still have to honor this kind of configuration, so that make sure the clients does get the unique location, and the catalogs could be some issue like doesn't provide any capability at all.
So maybe just like, but regarding the REST specification, I don't see any need to even convey this notion of the table location should be unique, because like if you want a unique location, just don't specify one, right? And the catalog will take care that it is unique. And then also the other way around, like what we do with Lakekeeper is that like every time someone creates a table, we have a very fancy Postgres index, and we do a prefix search and a suffix search to actually make sure that the location is unique. So and we've seen in the past, for example, in Trino and other query engines, that they define the location by default, and that is incompatible with some things like, for example, soft deletion. So whatever we do like with the other catalogs, I'm just advocating for let's not advocate in any way that this should be used with the REST catalog. Ideally, not even apply to it.
I do. Have we clarified though that if you send an empty, well, I'm worrying that we might have some users of the REST spec who don't send an empty location because they always try to figure out what the default location should be on the client side and populate it. Like maybe that's something we have to note though. Like,
Yeah, so
do not send the string.
There's two ways you can deal with that. Like, I mean, the strict version of that is you throw a bad request and you say, hey, like you don't get a set to the table location. The alternative is you accept the table location, throw it away immediately, and send them back metadata that has a new location. And I think both of those are perfectly valid. When the catalog is in control, when it's REST catalog, it can reset the location for its own reasons. And, that may... I don't see any cases where that would actually cause problems for clients. Like I haven't heard that come up. So I'm not too worried about the REST catalog side. I think the real question is, and I haven't looked closely at the PR about how we're achieving the unique name. If it's something where we're just like appending, some sort of hash or
Appended suffix.
Oh, okay. So yeah. And is that based on detecting whether it exists under the current one, or is it just like automatically producing some sort of...
I don't believe it checks. Sorry, I did a brief pass and I was like, this is like a good effort, but not secure, is my impression from when I looked at it.
Yeah, I don't think I think it's better than just using the table name, because it sounds like this is largely comes out of the fact that like somebody creates a table, renames that table, and then creates the same table that was created the first time. And now you're actually sharing a directory location because the file system just doesn't work the same way as like the rename operation. I think Hadoop catalog avoids this by like rename actually does a directory move, which is not great. But all of the other ones, like you've always had this problem in Hive where it can end up like reusing the locations if it's not doing the actual file system checks to see if it exists or not, which is what I think Christian was talking about. It's like actually going and validating that it does not exist.
Which, yeah, you need a Postgres index for though, because you have to do it transactionally, because if you don't, you're still,
So I don't actually have a huge problem with this. Like it makes the rename case a little bit better. But it definitely is, if for these other catalog implementations where the client is actually largely doing the specification of like where tables live, which is true for Glue, JDBC, Hive, all of those, it's kind of client controlled, and it always has been.
Okay. Well, so is the consensus here, this is an idea that's worth having in the client, but maybe we temper some of the naming or guarantees.
Yeah. I would expect like any REST implementation to just completely ignore this thing.
Yeah. I mean, it could be even a catalog specific parameter or something you send if you want it to do managed versus unmanaged or something. I don't know.
Mhm.
For reference, like didn't the tabular implementation just always ignored what was passed in, right? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I think Sparrows did the two things where Daniel just mentioned. First, we checked if you specify the location, we check if this overlaps with the other tables, and if you don't, then we give you one unique one, which is most likely it's not a UUID or something hash. It's a meaningful name for that particular table.
Yeah. And I think it really just comes down to like, how much control do you want to give clients? Because like that also gives them the opportunity to screw things up, where it's like over time tables get renamed, they drift from the actual physical location. And even if you're checking to make sure like something doesn't collide in the future, you could get into a weird situation where like, hey, they've done that create, rename, and then much later they come in and try and create with a location that now collides with that. And it's confusing because, hey, why the heck does this, get rejected? Like, I don't have a table called this. And you just run into that situation if you don't have some sort of like unique element to the pathing.
Yeah.
So I think, we can go back and, take a look at the PR if you have thoughts or strong opinions about it. I'm not totally opposed to it. Like, I think that it's an improvement over just like using the table name in the path. And REST can happily ignore it and do what it wants. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a very heavy lift for this PR either. It just hits a lot of different files, so it's worth checking out if you have thoughts.
Yeah.
Maybe just last comment there that like I think as a REST implementation, even then we should at least honor the protocol, right? If we have some legacy applications writing S3A locations or requesting them, we must keep S3A, even though we might change something else. Or at least otherwise we don't have an option to like get an S3A tier table into the catalog at all, right? So I mean with Lakekeeper, for example, we disallow it by default to use S3A, but folks can enable it. And the only way to get a table in with S3A is specifying the location.
Well, so here is where I want to bring in relative pathing again and locations, because maybe that isn't the case, and we have alternate solutions to that problem.
Absolutely agree. That's the way forward. Yeah.
So I've been talking with Talit, and he's working on a write-up for the relative paths. But I do think overall, like I am a little concerned. Like S3 is a real pain.
Yeah.
Mostly because like it is a very like Hadoop ecosystem thing, and it's really just a scheme mapping to an implementation. Yeah. And so I think we should take that kind of case by case. I would prefer that we discourage the use of S3A, S3N, or any other non-standard schemes. Just because that does not translate or travel well across different engines and ecosystems. A lot of people have started to adapt to like support and read S3A, but that doesn't necessarily mean they preserve it. And so you may end up actually with metadata then that gets like a real mix of S3A and S3N. And we've had to work around that in all the procedures. So we have to like, make sure that like when we do orphan files or something like that, the difference in the path isn't just the scheme difference. And so like we've had to work around this a ton. I would much prefer if we could like discourage the use strongly.
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay. Seems like we have some consensus on the PR, and we just like recommend everyone to take a further look on that. So we can move to the next. It's about the event endpoints. So Christian, do you want to provide more information about that?
Yeah, sure. So after like the last discussion, 3, I think, major changes happened. First is no trace of transaction anymore. So the transaction is now called request ID. And I also like removed any wording of like all events with the same request ID happened in the same transaction. So that's the first change. The second change is trying to get a more flexible user. I think this is probably the most controversial one, because we don't have any notion of a user in the spec yet. I tried to add one that is quite flexible, but I'm not sure if this is the best way. So currently it works via having basically a type. So I'm not calling it user, because a user for me is like something that can be authenticated, while an actor might be a role that cannot be authenticated by itself, which is why I called it actor. It has a type and an ID. The type is just a string, so you can pass in this is a role, a user, sales principal, whatever like is specific to this environment, and an ID. And then also a hash map string, right, in which you can pass whatever else you want. And also we have a little recursion in there. So we have an assumed by field, which again has a little actor in it. So you can, like, what I tried to do with that is like, I think something that we have very often is a user is assuming a role, right? And you somehow want to maybe convey this. It's something that, of course, nobody has to use, right? It's not mandatory, but it's just a flexibility. So this is.
So I noticed that, and my only thought on that was like we already have like the metadata field, right? Where you can, which is basically to put, use case specific or system specific information, which could potentially also include any sort of impersonation type information. Because I did think the recursion thing, because like some do have like impersonation chains, like that's a thing as well. But then the question is like, do we need to actually support that as a top level concept, or is that just metadata that is like implementation specific?
Yeah, I thought about the same thing. It felt like easy enough to just add this recursion, this one field, and having it standardized, right? If we already agree on like some form of actor, just having a dedicated assumed by field and not, 5 different assumed, Polaris assumed by, Lakekeeper assumed by, I don't know, that was my motivation there. I see the complexity, but I also thought that there is value in that. And nobody has to use it, right? If there is a different form of assume role, we can still put everything in the properties. Yeah.
I didn't leave a comment, so I'm okay with it. So I think it's worth calling out that like it could be done the other way. And I do think that different systems take a different approach about like whether you can assume a role, or if that's like really a thing that they track, or if it's always like a specific identity that's performing an operation. And so I think okay, I'm good with it.
Yeah, and then the last point that I added is now custom operations. With custom operations, there is now, it's also a little bit tricky to add there. So one of my goals when implementing this was like, we have the operations type enum basically, right? And this is now extendable. We allow like additional properties there, but those additional properties are like regx, so they need to start with an X, so basically external. The main reason for that being that I don't want us to think in the future when we want to add a feature to the Iceberg REST catalog specification, so a new operation that maybe some catalog already out there uses it with a slightly different notion. So basically the idea is, or what is possible right now is that like if you derive a statically typed client from the REST specification, you can still read every single event coming in, and it will just end up in a custom type. It has a subtype basically in it. So I guess these are the 3 main changes, and any comments are welcome. Yeah.
I'm okay with the state it's in. Like, I think the question that I had following this would just be, okay, assume that we adopt this. What do we do for reference implementation of it? Is this something that we put into the REST catalog test fixture as like, hey, we add an implementation so people can hit the events endpoint and see the structure and like use it as a way to build and test? It's just kind of like adopting the spec. I would think that we want something there for people to use. So what does that look like?
could we just have like well-formed events that we just spit out? So not even like a real implementation, but just, these are standardized events. You need to be able to at least handle these coming out of the endpoint.
So I mean, tests and types, right? These two.
I do think, like, I mean, if you think of the REST fixtures, you could produce all of the, or capture like an in-memory version, just a list of the events, and have a reference implementation so that we can call the catalog and then we can go validate the events, right? And anybody, and I guess you could also have a mode or something like that where you say, like, produce random events, and I can just like hit something to consume them. But like at the same time, I think you kind of want to have that round trip functionality of like, hey, I create a table. I want to validate that I got a create table event.
Yufe?
Yeah, I'm still look at the proposal. I saw the first use cases for the federation, right? Or for these events, so that how it works is the catalog itself, where it generates these events, put somewhere stored in locally, and the remote catalogs, which try to federate, to grab these events. Our discussion last time is actually there's not any consistent guarantee between these events for across the catalog as well as for the single table. So my question is, like for catalog federation, it might not be so useful. Like we can do the range query for the current status of all these objects within the catalogs instead of you pull the events.
Yes, but so Yufei, we agreed that having a transactional guarantee shouldn't be part of the REST specification itself, right? But catalogs can still, of course, give guarantees, and the design of the REST endpoint or of the event endpoints as we currently have it can be transactionally safe or eventually consistent or whatever we want, right? It just needs to be. The main reason why we didn't put it in the spec is because not all catalogs can offer this, right? And not everyone wanted to have it like in the critical commit path, right? So, but like if like Polaris, Lakekeeper, Unity, whatever catalogs out there decide to actually make it eventual or give some guarantees about that, we should just put it, in our own documentations, and then people can rely on that. So, yeah. It's just not in the standard, but it doesn't mean that it's not there for every catalog. Does that mean?
I understand this part. I think that's cool if one single catalogs can provide this kind of a consistent. It's pretty cool, and especially for the federation. I'm not talking about audit. Audit could be fine. Like there's no consistent, then that's fine. But especially for the federation use cases, we need the latest status, especially the latest status. We don't necessarily need the history, transaction history, but we need the latest status at that time point. We try to pull the status from the remote one. So my question still be, if that's really hard to achieve, why don't you just pull instead of you have the events? Because even we say, okay, this is still the catalog side implementation, you can provide a consistent guarantee, but still, like in reality, it's pretty hard to provide that.
Yeah, so I agree. Like it's not super easy to implement this transactionally guaranteed, right? Because then it needs to be part of the critical commit path. Yeah. So, but what you're saying is you would just crawl the catalog, and probably use etext or something on each individual table.
We don't have. Yes, that's the general idea, but we don't have to go each individual things. We may figure out something like grouping or range query with etext, so that you can at least at that moment you will always get the latest one. With etext, we save some, of course, cost by not sending back all these metadata
Yeah. So
I'm just comparing like events. I think it's very useful for audit use cases, but I'm just double check about the federation use case. If we say, okay, this is also good for federation use case, then it's become a thing that how do we make that consistent between two? Because this is one of the critical requirements for consistency between two catalogs. In case you drop table or renames or kind of updates, you need these.
So I mean, like if you're looking for like full consistency, like that, I mean, that's a non-goal. Like it's called out for getting at least like read level consistency. Like you can use a combination of like events that are generated. You can put in the metadata for like a table commit event, the E tag, and then you can use the load table E tag as a way to validate against the upstream catalog that it's still that version. Otherwise, you could do a load through or something like that. So there are ways that you can improve upon, the consistency of the federation, but it's a non-goal to try and actually make it a fully consistent, like federated replica of the upstream catalog.
When you say it's non-goal, I think it's non-goal to preserve all history, right? Like transaction history, we don't try to preserve that, but when you try to grab this current status of the one catalogs for one certain table, like 10 out of the 100 table or the 100 table within particular namespace, you want to get the consistent view at that point for that particular catalogs, right? Otherwise, what's the point of the pull that thing?
Yeah, so I mean, it's still a batch, like for a batch oriented, like it's the first batch oriented like endpoint that we have in this area, right? One of the major use cases actually, so I think, so for us, it would still help with federation, right? So with Lakekeeper, we will implement this transactional consistent and we will use it for federation, basically. But I think like also from the community side, one of the most important use cases that we had or that we identified last time, I think, Daniel, you even said for you, this is the most important one, is number 2 here, which is like notifications to external stakeholders and workflow triggers, right? So basically having an airflow sensor doing something if something happens, in some area of your lakehouse. So I think it does support federation. Like I agree, it's without eventual consistency, it's a little bit of a weaker point there, and we still need to eventually, check a table, but then maybe less frequently if we haven't heard about this table for a while. But then also it helps with like, well, the other 2 use cases that are there, audits, and especially informing other systems that something happened to your data.
And
I think that's
for your example. I think if you're saying like, hey, well, we want a consistent view of like, if somebody does a list namespace, I want a consistent view of it. Like the way you would do that in a federated sense is you would actually just go do the list against the upstream system. Like the point of the events is that we can offload some of that request volume, because you could just proxy every single request to the other catalog, right? And the event-based mechanism allows you to offload that work. So if your guarantee was like, I need exactly what the other catalog provides, you just proxy every request through.
I think that make so if you're caching like for example the catalogs, when you do the REST catalog implementation, you have to cache in. Most of people may just cache all these current status of the table. If you update, I cache some location, something like that, so that you still get the latest status, even you don't say that this is the events have been generated for this particular table or multiple tables views. Then you still cache that in the memory, and in that case, if you something like the tags will be when you pull that, you still get the good performance by checking caching. So you go to the eventual persistent things, and I think event is fine for some use cases, especially when Christian talking about you want to notify the other system what happens within the REST catalogs, right? Which is a valid use case. But my point is, does that need a new spec change? Could we just use kind of event listener for that, which make that each individual implementation can just do their thing without any spec change?
No, I think we should standardize on how the events are handled, because if you look around it, like if you're designing a client that needs to rely on events, then they need to design something separately for Glue, separately for Polaris, and separately for every other system, which becomes cumbersome. But if we have a standardized notion of APIs, event APIs, then the client or the engines or any system that wants to understand what has happened or respond to the changes, they can handle it in a more standardized way. So I do think there's a value in having this as part of the spec.
Yeah, I think standardization is one good point where you wanna each individual like different clients can talk to different the catalogs so that they don't have to rewrite the code or customize their codes in case of the different implementation.
Yeah, because otherwise, like we would be implementing a separate method for each catalog, and they are gonna differ widely. And also, like they would have their own spec. So, like Glue already has a system where you can do kind of search for changes on the tables. But then, if we have to implement it for every other catalog out there, and there's no standardized way or standardized API for those changes, then it gets very complicated on, let's say, a database engine that needs to respond well to any changes happening on the catalog.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. If we want to standardize. Still, I think for federation, maybe we could have something else where kind of range querying, or when you list the tables namespace, we can use etag to identify each table or change, so that's at least give you better understanding of that.
I like list table e-tags.
I mean, there are ways that we could extend some of the other endpoints to support e-tags. Like right now, we support them with load table.
Yeah.
So you can tell whether a table has changed or not with a lightweight request. You could do the same thing with list table, actually, because we could produce an e-tag as part of the response for a list operation. That does mean that, like, still, if you are federating, you're hitting that upstream catalog quite a bit, but it ideally would be these lighter weight, like e-tag kind of requests. I think most of the use cases we're seeing right now for federation don't require that level of strong consistency. It's mostly kind of like a lightweight read replica. You know that you don't have the absolute latest data. And we can probably in the future try and close that gap a little bit, but I don't think we're ever getting to a point where we're assuring consistency. I do want to go back to the question though about the reference implementation, because that is something that concerns me a little bit. Like, we continue to evolve the REST specification, and we've got a number of things in REST that we don't have implementations for right now. So like scan plan API is another big surface area. We don't have an implementation for it. I'd really like to make sure that we can nail down a path so that people can develop against this, even though it's not necessarily something that we integrate in an engine. Like, we have to have something there to demonstrate, test against, and let people build against. If it's just a spec, that's a little concerning. And I don't want to get so far along this spec that we have like a complete spec that there's no implementation.
I know we have like a HAP implementation of the scan planning client stuff that's just sitting out in a PR somewhere. I think that's what we really should push for there. For this one, I mean, I'm okay with it not being like a full all the way through, like actually doing create table and then generating event. I'm fine if we're just like, here's a list of events that we will produce that you should test against.
I do think it's helpful to have like the request and response objects, the actual representation in the baseline somewhere that people can build off of. I know we auto generate like a Python version of it that's out there. I think the Python project depends on it, or I don't even know what that's actually used for at this point. But I do think just like something lightweight in the test fixtures, I do think it would actually be relatively easy to introduce. But it's mostly the request and response objects, so then people can build the clients that they need for implementations.
I mean, that sounds real good to me. I mean, we should just mic that up as a bunch of issues, good first issues for people to do. I think that's a great way to get people into the project as well. Anyone else strong feelings about that?
I think that's
Yeah, I
good.
think so. I'm not quite worried about this one. Like, but for scan planning, we actually need the client side to be really ready, and then this feature will be useful. Otherwise, like even you have provided this functionality from the server side, it's still not quite useful.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I mean, mostly I'm wondering. So like, I think everyone kind of has thought about this, but like, scan planning is kind of the answer to like Delta sharing service as like an equivalent kind of capability. And I don't know if we want to have the full implementation of how you would do this internally, but definitely have something. Just because I feel like that the way that I think it's implemented for Delta is also the right thing. Like maybe it's a separate service, it's not actually part of like your catalog itself. I don't know.
I mean, I do think it would be helpful to have the test fixtures, because ultimately all we're going to do behind the test fixture is run a table scan, pass the filters, chop up the result, and send it back through the response APIs. And it's something easy people can stand up as a REST image or as a Docker image and like play around with and test their clients against.
Yeah, so. Fair enough. Yeah, and that's very limited in scope.
Yeah,
I want to encourage people who are not in the project, if you're talking to anyone who wants to get involved, these are like very simple things we could guide people through relatively easily.
Cool. Great discussions. I think we can move to the final one. I think the last one is about a proposal of adding the cascade drop option for the drop namespace endpoint.
Yes, so I can talk about that. So we did discuss in our last meeting about ability to add a cascade option for dropping the namespaces. So I did kind of a survey of what are other database systems they are doing. Looks like Cascade is a pretty standard keyword. It's part of the NC, and most of the databases, they do differentiate between Cascade and a restricted drop. And then I moved into like, what do we need to change in the REST spec to accommodate specifying if we should be how to specify a cascade option on the drop of the namespace, and what are the entities that would be affected by that.
So,
and yeah, go ahead, Chris.
So maybe just a quick comment from my side. I just checked the document. Like, first of all, I very much like the proposal. I mean, with Lakeeper, we've already implemented it. So I think this is really like worth something. Just like one comment, I think we would also need a patch requested in there. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. I'll just modify it and come back with the purge requested option as well. I think that's fair. Please review the doc and provide feedback, and I'll do a next iteration to like accommodate the feedback, and then maybe send a quick PR for making the changes.
I think the only thing that I have a question about, and maybe it's covered in the doc, but I think that some of the engines, Trino, possibly Hive, they will attempt to delete things as part of that cascade. So this gets back to the question of hey, is the client responsible for deleting things, or is the catalog responsible? I think we're actually a little safer in the namespace, because like if you don't give them credentials to do anything, like they should just hard fail. And I I think I'm mostly okay with that, but we also possibly want to talk to the Trino team and see, is there some mechanism by which like that we can make that cleaner so that it isn't like you issue the command and then you get an exception because you can't do the delete or something like that.
Yes, so maybe we should have that as a separate discussion because as we're doing some of the implementation, for example, I'm not sure how things are gonna work on a system like S3 table where they don't allow you to do any deletion, like how Trino is gonna work over there. And then like this could be one thing where we can maybe formalize it a bit more that it is the catalog's responsibilities and not the engine responsibility. But should we have this as part of this discussion, or should we have a separate discussion to formalize that?
I think we have this other thread where we're talking about this for Spark drop tables, and I know that's also stalled, and we need to get back to that, where we hard coded into our Spark drop table that it's a client side, and there's no way to let the catalog do it. The client always does it first, and I think our agreement there was this is probably the wrong decision for REST clients, and for REST clients we should probably never do things on the client side. We should always, for REST services, we let them do what they want to do, and we don't do anything preemptively.
Yeah, for this other proposal, I think I think it's pretty much ready for review. We've talked about it a few times. I think the last decision that we need to take is should it be like catalog wide or REST catalog specific? And we implemented it REST catalog specific, kind of liked it, but I think Ryan didn't like it too much. I don't know. Yeah, so a few more eyes on that would help. Let me post the link.
I don't think Ryan cared enough to block it. We should probably. I'll put it on my notes unless anyone else sees him earlier than I do to ask him. But I think we should be okay, especially because we're going to do 2.0 probably sometime this year, and all that is going to get dropped anyway.
But
I mean, is that I guess the problem is like, do we have a situation where you have a REST client and you want the client to clean up? Because that complicates things. Because otherwise, you can make the REST implementation. You could actually have like the Spark understand via some mix-in or something like that. Hey, do the cleanup, don't do the cleanup, based on the implementation as opposed to a property.
As a response from the REST service.
Well, not a response from the REST service. I'm just thinking through this right now, but it's like, in the Spark, Spark table or Spark catalog where we do the drop operation, you could check something that tells you whether the implementation is going to do the cleanup or not. And we could make it, if it's REST, you don't do it. If it's other things, you do it, or you look at the property.
So that's in the PR right now, is like if it's REST, but then there's an additional fallback where like you don't have to do it if you want the old behavior, because we didn't want to change the old behavior in the middle of a minor release.
Yeah.
That's why it's a little messy, but like.
Yeah.
And then there are things like where like if we are vending credentials for that table, and let's say your credentials are vended for let's say 30 minutes. If we couldn't drop the table, like we send the drop request, but couldn't delete everything within 30 minutes. Now we can't ask for new credentials because the table does not exist.
I think we're clear that it's not great the way it's currently implemented. We're just trying to figure out how we get to the clean state without breaking old behavior.
Okay, so I guess a few more eyes on that help. Like something that came up regarding like also your question, Melinda, do we need to discuss it now? I think so. One thing that we do need to discuss now is kind of like default behavior that we expect from query engines, right? Because we should probably put this here in the documentation. My take on that is like the query engine by default should not send this flag and let the catalog decide. Basically, let the catalog delete it if it's a managed table, but let the catalog not delete it if this is also an external table to this specific catalog, right? Mm-hmm. And because otherwise, like if a user doesn't specify like purge for when he drops a namespace, and the catalog would explicitly send purge requested false, that would be bad because the catalog would have to decline maybe, depending on what setting this is in, but this expresses a clear intention to not drop the data, right? And this might be a valid use case if you want to, deregister tables from one catalog and re-register them in another. While also, like the other way around, specifying a purge requested true, like always requiring the user to specify drop namespace purge, seems like too much of an overhead because the catalog already knows, well, I'm managing this table, so I should delete the data, right? Which is why my point is that this flag should just be, an override, but query engines shouldn't specify it at all. And I think having this notion in here in the documentation of the RESPEC helps, because then we can pinpoint all the ones that do it differently.
Yeah, Christian, but one thing over there, like a lot of time, like as a query engine, we might need better control of the semantics that we want. For example, maybe I want that if I want to drop with the cascade, I might need to clean up whatever state that I have on my side as well. But if the catalog does not support it, then it gives me a returns an error. Then I know that it does not support the cascade. Then maybe I need to send a non-cascade request. Or I can, based on the user's input, like if the user specifies a cascade, or based on the engine, does the engine drop schema or whatever, by default add a cascade behavior or not, then I can standardize that.
So I have a little bit of a concern because, Christian, if I was understanding you correctly, you're actually looking for 3 options when SQL only provides you 2.
Yep.
So like, I'm going to use the drop table as the example, because you're saying, hey, maybe I want to do drop table and I explicitly want to say no purge. That's not an option, because in SQL, I can just say drop table, or I can say drop table with purge.
Yep.
And I think that, maybe we actually need to not use drop table for the unregister, and we actually need to explicitly have an unregister, which is telling the catalog, you no longer own this, don't muck with the data, it's just not yours to deal with anymore. I think with the cascade, it's a little easier, because I don't think we really need those 3 options. It's really just 2, which is, drop with cascade. And I think if you can throw unsupported, then like S3 tables or something that may not allow you to do that kind of operation, it just says, hey, unsupported, you can't call with cascade.
Yeah.
And then I think the main thing is just like the default probably then needs to be not cascade, because we don't have a no cascade option.
Exactly.
Right? And I think that aligns with the implementations that we have so far, because right now we disallow cascade.
For cascade, I agree. We only have these 2 options, but for purge, we again need 3, also on namespace level. And my point is, we need a smart default, right? So basically, clients should only send. My take on this is clients should only send, true. Basically, if the client specifies this, and if the client does not specify this, it's up to the catalog to choose the correct option.
The way that I look at purge is a little bit different. I think drop always means delete. Purge means delete it as soon as possible, like immediately.
Yeah.
And that the use case difference is like, hey, if I have data that I can't retain, or I have some sort of like legal requirement or limitation that needs to be deleted immediately, or as soon as the catalog can possibly get to it, that's what purge means.
Yeah.
I want it gone, like no recovery. Like, because a lot of catalogs support the idea of like, hey, I'll keep it around for 7 days or 3 days or whatever it is. Like purge means no, get rid of it now. It doesn't mean that like I'm going to delete it. And it doesn't mean like leave the data alone if I don't say purge. It's really drop is drop. It should eventually be gone. And when you say drop with no purge, you're telling the catalog, take care of it whenever you want to take care of it. Like whatever is reasonable to you. Purge means get it out of there. And then we don't have the option for saying like, yeah, but don't get rid of it. Like drop it, but don't get rid of it. And I think that's like a separate thing. That's like outside.
Then we do need the separate thing, because right now we don't have any way to convey this information unless we specify, explicitly purge requested false. Like for us, that typically means keep the data, please.
And that's where I
metadata in the catalog.
like having an unregister as a parallel to the register makes sense, because then you're explicitly telling the catalog, like, you no longer own this thing.
Yeah, but that comes then again with the same problem for namespaces, right? So if we want to also use this namespace for batch unregister, right? We have the same problem there.
I would not use namespaces that, like, we don't have anything else. You don't have like a batch rename. You don't have like batch operations at the namespace level. And you don't need to unregister a namespace, right?
I don't know, move portion of your lakehouse into another catalog, right? Unregister everything that we have here, instead of calling it for each table individually. But I guess, I mean, if I'm fine, like if we have an unregistered endpoint, that's good enough. Yeah. Unregistered table, sorry. Yeah.
I think you would just loop through all of them, because you do that same thing on the register side. Like, you don't have anything
Batch
to
yeah.
register like in batch. So like,
new idea, yeah.
no.
That wasn't the purpose. No, it's fine, yeah. Okay.
I'll clarify the purge option, and then I'll also wait for some consensus on the purge, like the drop behavior.
Yeah. Do we have anything that supports SQL syntax for a purge on a namespace, or is that going to be purely a API level?
Cascade, right, on the schema.
Well, Cascade is different than purge, right?
Sorry, purge. Yeah, you're right. No.
Drop cascade purge is the allowed grammar.
Yeah.
Well, I'm that's what I'm questioning, because I don't think that is allowed grammar. Not that I know of.
Yeah, I just want to ask this basic question. Like, when you drop a namespace with Cascade, does that implicitly means you want to purge all the tables?
No, I think the feedback is to explicitly introduce a separate flag, so we can decide we want to purge the tables underneath that or not.
Yeah, I think that that's just difficult because, and I would almost argue, don't allow purge on a drop namespace. And the reason is we don't have SQL syntax for that. So there's not really an effective way to map that through for any engine. Like, I was just looking through a couple examples, and they don't have that concept. So it's like, if you really need the data deleted, you should call it on every table, right? If you're just doing a cascade for convenience to drop whole, things, then like you can just say cascade and let the catalog clean it up whenever you want to clean it up. Like, you can explicitly remove data if you need to, but you need to explicitly call purge on those entities themselves. And I think I like, we could always engineer the solution for like, hey, you could purge your whole catalog, like you could do the whole thing. Like, but I think we cover the use cases, and we don't need to try and do everything with every option.
That makes sense. Like, I also added that NC SQL syntax, and there is no notion of specifying a purge with Cascade.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we just argued it away. I like that. Less complexity, and the catalog can decide.
Yeah.
Undefined, what I wanted to have as a default anyway. Nice.
And we can take up the unregistered question separately as well. Like, if, hey, do we need something for the, like, stop working against this table but don't delete the data kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that would be useful, because having a separate SQL for that would also be something that we did discuss at some point as well.
Okay, cool guys. I think we are out of time. So thanks for joining this meeting. And as usual, the recording will be available shortly. Have a great time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.